another one of our honest conversations. I'm Nikki Irish with the DC Bar Lawyer Assistance Program. And I just really want to start today with maybe acknowledging that giving everybody some grace. So starting with grace, because everyone feels a bit stuck at some point in life, and that many, many people feel stuck right now. Over 100 people registered for this program. So clearly you in attendance today are not alone. And we decided to focus this honest conversation on getting unstuck because we're seeing it clinically and kind of frankly in the social milieu. And we'll look at those survey results in just a minute. So we've all been impacted the past 3 years in different ways, but we have all been impacted. We aren't the same people we were in February 2020, and that is okay. It's normal, it's expected. But what that means though, is it can be a whole lot harder to make changes if we aren't giving ourselves grace, if we aren't taking time to reflect, if we're not acknowledging the changes, if we don't have the support system we need or the coping strategies that used to work. So I want to start this kind of introduction by offering all of us on here grace for being human, for having a human experience. And at least for this hour, let's focus on avoiding minimizing our feelings. Your feelings are valid and important, no matter what anybody says. And the other piece I want to touch on quickly is just that as we have a conversation today, I want to make a clear distinction between mental health and mental illness, that mental health is something that everyone has and should be paying attention to and should be investing in. And that mental illness is kind of when the brain isn't functioning in the way you need it to, right? So there are symptoms of anxiety, depression, bipolar, whatever that may be, aren't cured by a long walk or time with friends alone. It takes more than that. So if you're experiencing symptoms, please don't hesitate to reach out for help. The LAP is here for you. But I also would want to emphasize that you don't need to be experiencing symptoms of mental illness to reach out to the Lawyer Assistance Program. It's here to help you get unstuck, to give you an outsider's perspective, to provide resources and support. We have volunteers, we have support groups. And if you're not in DC, all states have some version of a Lawyer Assistance Program. So sometimes all it can take is having a sounding board, somebody to be supportive, to kind of give you permission to be stuck and struggling with getting unstuck. So don't hesitate to use this free and confidential resource. And we'll put some information in the chat a little bit later about that. And this is a short introduction because I kind of want to give us plenty of time for the good stuff, this conversation. So I want to emphasize that everybody should ask questions. Please feel to give comments, raise your hand. I will call on you, put it in the chat. We'll make sure it gets read or responded to. We really want this space to be for you. And with that, I want to show you the poll results. And just the whole point is so you normalize, we're normalizing this experience for you, that everybody is struggling in kind of some capacity, clearly, and maybe in many areas, right? And then also just kind of recognizing some of the barriers that we're noticing, that different people have different barriers, but that everybody's got some, and really a large one, so almost 60%, right, in certain uncertainty regarding what I want or kind of how to take the next steps. And then an even larger portion is fear of making the wrong decision or fear of failing. So these are some things we're going to talk about today. And like I said, please use this time and space for you. That's what it's here for. And with that, I'm going to introduce quickly Jesse, Sharon, and Denise. So all with the Lawyer Assistance Program. Denise over there, she is going to be monitoring the chat for us. So if somebody's responding, it's most likely her. And then Jesse and Sharon are going to participate with me in this conversation. And Jesse, I'm going to kick it off with you. If you can just talk to us a little bit about kind of what it means to be stuck.
Absolutely. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I think, when you think of the word being stuck, I think one of the things you want to think about is this overarching sense in that where I am now is not where I want to be. And I want to be in another place, but I feel like I can't move. So also be willing to kind of explore, in what way do you feel stuck? Is it physically? Do you feel stuck physically? Like whether it's job, locality, relationship? Do you feel a sense of being stuck emotionally? Like you're lacking connections to your emotions and feeling like it's just a surface connection because heck, I don't want to go a little deeper, and we'll talk about a little bit about that later, but also, are you mentally stuck? Do you find that you're overthinking a lot? These thoughts that you're having keep replaying, and you're stuck in the same monologue in your mind. So, but it's an overarching feeling, just a lack of growth, forward movement in your life, and the overarching sense that I don't have the ability to implement the changes I want, but there's a yearning for change.
Thanks, Jesse. Sharon, anything you would want to add to that? No? Great. Jesse got it all. um, so just thinking about maybe a little bit of things that hold us back. So what are some of the things that we have this yearning, right? We want to change. I can feel it like in my body. For me, at least, I often feel it in my body. There is like I just want to get rid of something, except I can't. So Sharon, can you talk a little bit about kind of what holds us back from making that change, even though we know maybe something needs to change?
Sure. I think exactly what you said, Nikki, right? Like something might be working enough, but it's also keeping us stuck, right? So not getting out of our own comfort zone. Why would we want to do that? Right? It feels safe. So why do I want to do something different? And it can be a really small change, right? It can be taking a class, finding a new hobby, but like just even like the thought of it, not actually even going and doing it yet. And I think sometimes we forget that we've been on autopilot for 3+ years, maybe even before. If you're not on autopilot, that's great. But if you are, you're probably here if you are. And it's been working, right? We have this like maybe later attitude, when I finish school or when the kids are finally out of the house. But we need to slow down and take the time to assess, like, how are we really feeling, right? And when we do that, we start to feel less stuck, because we can then start to take action towards the thing that we want in our life, and so how do we sort of do that? Well, sometimes we can just do something really small. Like as therapists, I feel like we're always saying breathe, right? For me, it's painting. For others, it might be journaling, dancing, walking, just developing some kind of practice to turn down the noise, and so we can actually be present with ourselves.
Jesse, I wonder if
Actually, Nikki, before
Yeah.
you finish that thought, I kind of
Yeah.
also want to give permission to, even when the yearning for the change is there, you may not know what you want to change.
Yeah.
There's something that's not working, but you can't even identify or even figure out what is it that is in my life right now that I want to change. So be willing to ask yourself.
Mhm.
I always sometimes ask it as like a miracle question. If you woke up tomorrow and things were different, what would not be in your life and what would be? How would you feel different? So maybe that can help you really start to explore what is that change you want to make if you don't know what it is right now.
Thank you, Jesse. I think that's a big piece that I'm gonna kind of pin in my head and come back to in a moment, right? Because I think we're kind of talking about like what it means to be stuck, and then there's this space of like before getting unstuck, like, well, what does that mean? What do I want? Like, what does unstuck even look like? Which is what you were talking about, right? With that miracle question. So before I jump to kind of what would that look like, can you talk a little bit about kind of like the processing, like kind of that fear of fear of what's next? Sometimes we're afraid to even take time to reflect because we don't know what might come up for us, or we might be uncomfortable with the feelings that might be coming up. So are difficult emotions something that also kind of help us stay stuck?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think when you think about change overall, whether it's positive or negative, change is uncomfortable. Think about, happy moments, whether it's buying a new house, children, graduating from law school, all exciting things, but all things that are change and brings about a sense of comfortableness, because that means there's a next step. So change is always uncomfortable. But when you're looking at getting unstuck and that type of change, you're talking about, I know what this feels like. I know what it feels to be stuck. And I've found ways to deal with that feeling. I don't like the feeling, but at least I know it.
Mm-hmm.
I
It's
know
familiar.
what to expect from it. I know how to handle this feeling. Now I want to get unstuck. But what if I fail in trying to get unstuck? So now I'm stuck with, now I have the feeling of being stuck and the feeling of I failed in my attempt to get unstuck. So now I got two uncomfortable feelings that I know I don't want to deal with. And again, it could be multiple feelings, but now I got two different situations that I'm uncomfortable about. I'm unstuck and I failed to change my unstuck. So why do I risk this when I know what this feels like? I don't know what this is going to feel like. I can manage this. Can I also manage being stuck and not succeeding? So if I don't want to be prepared for this, I just stay being stuck. I stay on that because it's familiar, it's comfortable, and I know how to deal with it. But recognize that then if the shift changes make, you're going to stay in that stuck position.
So I think I kind of heard two things, right? This is familiar. And we like homeostasis, right? Like as human beings, we really like to be safe and secure, even if it's like not giving us the things that we maybe need or not kind of putting us on a path that we want to be on. We love homeostasis.
It's giving us something though. It may not be giving us everything. We are getting something from it.
Yes.
It may be small, but it's enough to sustain us to get through this day. I have enough to sustain me to this day.
That kind of circles back, right, to like the mechanisms that maybe some of us have adapted over the past 3 years, like have got, right? They really were useful for surviving the past 3 years, but maybe aren't useful as they could be moving forward. And sometimes acknowledging that this was actually effective and maybe it is what I needed then, but is it what I need kind of for the future?
For future growth, especially if that's my goal for growing.
All right, so coming back to difficult emotions, right? Essentially, there are two pieces I have a question, but also a comment. Comment is, what I heard is, this is normal, right? Like to kind of wanting to avoid the discomfort is normal. And that the discomfort doesn't mean I'm doing it wrong. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Because I think we recognize if I feel uncomfortable, it must be a misstep, Maybe I need to take a step back. But maybe the discomfort is that this is not what I'm used to doing. That's why it's uncomfortable. But maybe if I keep doing it the same way I got comfortable with the being stuck, maybe I can get comfortable with this change.
So then that's my question, like, how do I deal with the difficult emotions? Like, how do I tolerate them?
And maybe a variety of ways, like deep breathing, like again, recognizing, listen, I'm uncomfortable, but it's okay for me being uncomfortable because I'm working through this discomfort because I want this ultimate goal. So it's almost an acceptance of, yes, I'm feeling uncomfortable, but it's okay. Maybe it may be talking through it with a friend, like, listen, this is very uncomfortable. I don't know how to work through this.
I think it's also showing up here. Right. I'm not trying to plug us, but like people that, when you're saying that, like showing up to the support groups, if you're in one, here or not here meaning the lab, talking to a therapist, right? Because I feel like Jesse and I are always talking to our clients about, right, like if people are feeling like this in terms of the discomfort, to like knock on the door, see where you're at, right? Do we want to sort of move it a little, like, it's kind of like a stuck feeling. Do we want to address it today? Do we want to even like see, what's coming up for us? Sometimes absolutely not, right? Other times, maybe I actually do want to sort of talk about it a little bit or move it a little. But I think you deal with it as much as you give it time, as much as you want to deal with it. The folks that aren't here probably aren't dealing with it, right? A lot of people don't want to knock on the door at all.
Okay, so we've started touching on a little bit of kind of the emotions difficult emotions can sometimes also keep us stuck, and like the fears, the thoughts that are like we're believing, right? The thoughts in our head that we're having that we get stuck on and kind of say, oh, that must be true, and then we get stuck. So I want to touch on thoughts a little bit in the space of like self-reflection. So like, how do I figure out where I am stuck? Like if I just know I'm having a feeling of being stuck, but I'm not even sure, like I don't know that I want the new hobby. I haven't figured that part out for me. I just noticed there's something like I'm not feeling fulfilled, or I'm feeling frustrated, or I'm feeling burnt out. Like, so what does self-reflection kind of in this space look like?
Self-reflection may be that, okay, again, some of the signs may be lack of motivation, fulfillment, going through the day, feeling that, I think Sharon says that you're running on autopilot. Am I running on autopilot? Am I really engaged in my day-to-day? Or is just every day just another day? We recognize like every day is not going to be exciting, full of excitement or romance, but do you get a sense of joy, contentment? Can you walk away and say, you know what, I learned something today. I gained a skill. I'm grateful for the day. Something made me excited. Again, or maybe again, I'm just content with it wasn't bad, it wasn't great, but I had an okay day. Or do you feel like you're just going through the day where I'm not even engaging with my feelings, emotions, or even thoughts, that I'm just operating because I know what I have to do, I can do it, but there's no connections to my actions.
So it starts with kind of recognizing some of the signs is essentially. Sharon, looked like you were.
I was just going to add in probably what you were going to say, which is we want to remember that it's okay. Give yourself permission to feel what you're feeling too, what Jesse was saying, right? If you're not quite ready or you're having this fear, like it's okay. You don't have to beat yourself up about it. That is where you are. Like you said, when you started the program, like give yourself grace. That's where you are today at 2:19. You might be in a different place at 4:00 next week, next month, next year, but we're just working with right now.
Can I throw something in or just
Please do. Yeah.
idea Chris suggested that this is sort of a Buddhist teaching, like Buddhist mindfulness of knowing we are enough in the present moment. We are okay and enough and worthy in the present moment, versus this tension of knowing that something needs to be changed, or we want to change something, or we want to reach a goal, but just to bring it back to sort of I am worthy in this moment from a Buddhist standpoint, that she wondered whether or not we have any thoughts about that. And I didn't have any thoughts about the
Oh, you were just sharing. I was waiting to let you.
No, but I love that. It made me think, I told Chris that it made me think of just this idea of accepting ourselves in the moment, whatever feelings come up for us, whatever frustrations, whether we're stuck or not, just that we are enough in that moment, that we're worthy, and that we will, just to have a level of confidence that when we can shift, we will shift towards something, or even if we don't, just to be okay and worthy, and we are enough in that moment. So yeah, I'm going to turn my mic off now, but just that, which she wanted to know what you all thought from that standpoint too, the Buddhist standpoint, because it kind of meshes with that, I think.
Yes, for sure. I see Jessie deep in thought. She's really thinking about it.
I think there is a connection there because I need it for minutes. There is a connection there. I do agree that.
You're stumping us over here, Chris.
I'm stuck. Yeah. I'm stuck on how to really articulate that.
I'm going to let Jessie think. I'm going to slightly take us this way, and I'm going to have Jessie bring us back when she's thought through that.
Chris, did you want to add something? I saw you off mute.
Hi, everyone. I don't feel
Please do.
equipped to do this, but I guess I just.
None of us are. It's okay.
Oh, thank you, everybody. And Jessie, you actually were sort of touching on this even before I asked the question, but like, I guess I struggle, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a Buddhist concept, but whether you believe in God or a divine source in the universe, or even just psychology of knowing that we're okay in the moment, or like comforting ourselves and telling us that we're okay in this moment. So I guess I was just looking for an approach or a tip, like how do we reconcile knowing that we're okay in the moment and wanting to do or feeling like we should do something to either get unstuck or to, because if we say, okay, everything's okay, then we won't do anything. Like we might not do anything.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Chris. appreciate you coming off, because I think it's, for me, what I hear is there either or? Can I still be okay
Yeah.
with where I am, but still want to implement some changes? And I think we can have both.
Yeah.
I think we can recognize that if you're a person, if you're coming from faith, whether it be your faith or another type of faith, that I am here because, a higher power thinks this is where I need to be. But we can still say, you know what, I could be in another place. I can still be working towards growth. I think both of them can happen.
Yep. That's exactly what I would say. Like, it's the
Okay.
duality, right? Like, we can hold competing feelings and thoughts at the same time, and that they both can be valid and accurate. And I think that's kind of one of the hardest parts of being human, is holding like opposing things true simultaneously. And I think that's what it is. And it's actually something we'd kind of written down to talk about a little bit, is just like permission and self-compassion in a space of, things can be going well, or like things can be good enough, right? I am good enough, and it's still not exactly how I want to be or how I want to feel, or I might not even know what that exactly is, but I know it's not where I am. And I can still be okay, right? Like, so it's tough. And I think it can also keep us stuck, right? Because it can be a space of like, well, if things are okay, well, then am I supposed to be changing? Or like, do I deserve to change? I think a lot of times, speaking as someone who caregive, right, have two young children, there can be a like, well, if they're good, then I'm good, and like I don't need to do anything more. But like, I deserve and can and should be like moving my own self like down my path, because that will be good for them too, ultimately, right? But like, it needs to be good for me. Like, so there's so many warring, like different pieces, I think, to this. um so I really appreciate you bringing that up, because I think a lot of people hold those in tension. And I think holding that tension can be really challenging, where we're actually like having a sounding board can be really useful, because we may not be able to see that tension, but like somebody else might be able to reflect it back to us. Even a good friend might be able to be like, yeah, that's, I feel that way too, Nikki, right? Or of course that's true. Why? But you also deserve better. I'm going to stop now because I could probably talk about this.
I just want to add
Jesse,
one
go.
more. It also makes me think of that saying, I'm not where I was before. So but I am I'm not where I used to be, but I'm not where I want to be. So recognizing the growth that I've made to be the person I am, but also still striving for the person I want to be, the change I want to be, the growth that I want to happen. But I'm still appreciating the growth that I have right here and right now.
Yeah. Sharon, you're smiling. Anything you want to add?
I'm good. I love these conversations.
So, right, we have some self-reflection. We've kind of talked about a little bit about like identifying where we're stuck, recognizing the emotions that are happening, giving ourselves permission and some self-compassion in this space. Self-compassion is key, actually, really, to change. So if it is a practice that is hard for you, there are lots of resources out there. What I'm gonna shift slightly, unless Sharon and Jesse pull me back, which is okay. Talking about a little bit about moving into this unstuck place. And I think this unstuck place will tie in a little bit in a minute to kind of, I see Kristen's comments on like the sounding board, right? Having a sounding board with experience and information. So I wanted to acknowledge that and say we'll circle back to that in a moment. But Sharon, maybe if you can talk about, so let's say we've gone through this kind of self-reflection space on, I've done Jesse's miracle question, or I've just said, what one thing would be, if one thing was different or one thing was removed, this would feel differently or be better. What do I do now? Like how do I start moving forward?
I'm picturing when back in the day when we used to be in the office and some clients would come in, right, like with a little notebook, and they're like, all right, so tell me like the script of how I can feel better, for your question. And I think that, one of the things that we talk about in terms of how to get unstuck, or how to sort of, sort of get to that goal setting place is to really think about our values and think about overarching, really, really big goals. And then we break it down into, we call them like SMART goals, right? Want them to be specific and achievable and measurable. And I think we do that work a lot of times with clients, and we'll talk about, sort of making those SMART goals and then writing them down, talking to a friend, like you mentioned, talking to your therapist, just sort of having a way to hold yourself accountable, right? And also, I think what's really important too is to remember to reward yourself as you make progress, right? When we have measurable goals, it's sort of easier to give yourself a reward because it might be 2-3 times a week I'm doing X, right? As opposed to 7 days a week I'm going to the gym and I'm doing X, Y, and Z, right? And so after those 2 times, you can see where you're headed. I think another thing is to recognize our self-talk, our negative self-talk, and to shift our thinking and our language, right? A lot of times we'll say like, I can't do this because of this, as opposed to, this is challenging, right? And sort of working through that discomfort. And that's not really the language that we use, I feel like, outside of the therapy world, right? We're always going to be our own worst critic.
So I've started identifying some goals. I've made them SMART. I maybe have give myself some self-compassion in a space and tried to think about a little bit about accountability. Actually, as a very brief tangent on that, I was thinking about this accountability space, and I'll put it in the resources that we'll send out a recording and resources after this. So if there are any specific resources you kind of are looking for, feel free to let us know. And I think Denise is working on putting some self-compassion resources in the chat. But what I was going to say, the accountability. So there's somebody, Gretchen Rubin is a writer about kind of happiness. She's a former attorney, actually. But she has this concept of, is it I think it's called the 4 tendencies. And it's basically about identifying who you are, right? Like I am a obliger and I do better with accountability to other people. I am a questioner and I really need to understand why I am doing the thing before I'm willing to do the thing. I'm a rebel and I really hate being told what to do. So I'm not going to do it if somebody tells me what to do. So I need to figure out kind of a way around that. And then I think the last one's like an upholder, and basically I will do it because I think it is I said I'm going to do it. But just spending time in that space of reflection on what is it, who am I and what do I need to get things done, I think can be really important. And the accountability part kind of made me think about that a little bit. So thank you for triggering that and letting me.
I'm just going to add to that real fast too. That and also reconnecting to the why, right? The value system of, well, why do I want to do this in the first place? Like, what is the importance? Who's gaining, et cetera. And I think a lot of times when we're sort of the hustle and bustle of every day, we forget maybe, why did we go to law school? Why did we want to become a parent? All the questions, that we don't really ask ourselves unless we're at those pivotal moments of turning a certain age or at a life cycle event. That's important as well.
Yep. Thank you. So there are a lot of things that disrupt us, right? One of the things though I want to make sure we have some time for, I know we have plenty of time, but is we saw kind of repeatedly on we sent out a survey beforehand, and then on the survey here is, so one is kind of lack of motivation. I am lacking motivation to get unstuck. It is not happening. What do I do with that? How do I approach it? It feels so big. I'm just going to sit back down in my chair and not try. Jesse or Sharon, do you want to kind of tackle that, or at least start the conversation?
Sure, I'll say enough. I get it. I totally agree with exactly what you're saying, Nikki, where the thought of the change that I want to make, when I identify this is the change I want to make, whether it's career, whether it's in my family, but the sheer thought or size of the change just is so enormous that I don't think I have enough motivation for it. So maybe being able to say, can I foster enough motivation to make one step towards that change? As Sharon mentioned, when you have that overarching goal of the change that you want to make, breaking it down to steps. You don't have to have all the motion to move forward, but do you have enough motivation to take step number one? And then through step number one, once I'm successful in step number two, can that produce more motivation for step number 2 and 3? Basically, what I'm saying is be willing to allow your motivation to grow with you as you are making the change. Motivation doesn't have to be 100%. It can grow with your change.
I have a colleague who often says action precedes motivation. That if you're going to wait around till you get motivated, you might be waiting forever. And I think that's often very true. And if we expect ourselves to like feel like I have a lot of energy and I'm really motivated to do the thing, we may be waiting. Like I'll never do the dishes. Like I don't want to do the dishes. Like right. But you know what I do? I put on Normal Gossip podcast and then I do the dishes. Right. Like, so I'm pairing something or I'm giving myself a reward or a treat. And if you don't know what Normal Gossip is, you should go Google it. It's delightful. Right. But but I don't wait till I feel motivated to do it because then it just won't happen. So I love Jesse's, like your idea of like letting the motivation kind of grow with you as you do, and that the action might actually build the motivation. Sharon, anything you want to add around the motivation space?
I was just going to say it's like exercise for a lot of people, right? It's like going to the gym and not wanting to go to the gym. And then you go to the gym and you're like, oh, I actually feel a little bit better. Maybe I should do that again. That's for a lot of things, dishes, gym, etc. Maybe it's even getting up to go to work. And then you're like, oh, that wasn't actually so bad, right? Or maybe you love your job. Like that was great.
And recognizing what those thoughts are, right? I think sometimes what is the thought that I'm having around that motivation, and challenging it a little bit rather than like believing it. I think sometimes it can be important to kind of dissect it and pull it apart. And if you have trouble doing that, that is what friends, sounding boards, and therapists are for. Or journaling even. Like if you write down what the thought is in front of you and then you have to read it, sometimes you're like, that doesn't make any sense. That's not true at all. Now I feel kind of awkward that I had that. So I think, being able to reflect a little bit, having sounding boards and spaces to do that can be really important in that motivation space. But also I think what we've all been talking about is that compassion, right? So being negative and antagonistic, it's not actually motivating, right? We often believe it is. We think kind of if we give the stick rather than the carrot, that we'll do the thing. And that's really not true, right? Instead, actually, the antagonism will anchor us much more in place than actually motivate us. So motivation was a big thing. And then fear, right? So fear of failure, fear of making the wrong choice. That was kind of one of the other big stuck points I feel like people identified. So I'm wondering if one of you can talk about that a little bit.
It's okay to be afraid. Listen, no one's telling you not to be afraid. Again, it's change. Change is scary, whether it's good or bad. But again, be willing to reframe your perspective of failure. First attempt in learning, fear is not fatal. We have failed in things before, and guess what? Did we try it again? Can anyone on this call say they got an A in every single law class they took? But you still went through, right? So being able to say like, okay, if I was not successful in this, did I learn from this? This change, but I still want to move forward with this change. What did I learn from the first time I tried to implement it that the next time I'm going to do differently? Basically just not allowing the fear to hinder you, but allow it to motivate you. Yeah, it can make you scary, but does the scary need to stop you? And I think lastly, at all thing you really think about is if your best friend failed at something, if your child failed at something, what would you tell them? Would you say to them, wow, you failed. You probably shouldn't do that again. You wouldn't say that to a best friend. You wouldn't say it to a child. So why did we say it to ourselves?
I think that's huge. And it's interesting. It's funny, I was reflecting on this. I have a almost 7-year-old, and we were talking about like, it's the next season or whatever. Like you can choose the next thing you want to do after school, right? Like, do you want to try swim? Do you want to try Taekwondo? Do you want to, or climbing? Like those were the three things he wanted to try. And he was like, I can't decide. He couldn't decide. He was like, I don't know. Maybe I want to do all of them. I don't know which one's going to be the right one to do. Like, what if I choose the wrong one? And I was like, oh, we're not even 7 and we're already like in this space. Right. So I say this to one, normalize it for you at 30 or 40 or 50, having those feelings and thoughts. And 2 is the conversation with him is, it's fine. Just pick one and we'll try it. And if you don't like it, we'll do the next one next time. Right? Like that there's you might make the wrong choice and that like you don't like it or it doesn't work for you, but does that make it wrong, or does it just mean you learn something and now you move on to the next one? So I think having that kind of reframe a little, it's a first attempt. Failure is like a first attempt at learning versus how could you're an idiot for making that choice. I think is really like an important distinction to kind of try to actively make, which comes back to Jesse's. What would you say to your best friend? What would you say to your child? What would you say to someone that you care about can be really important. Sharon?
No, I was going to add to that. I can't believe he's almost 7, but also in thinking, right, like in taking a child's perspective like that, right, and he's already having those thoughts. Clearly, everyone here is older the age of 7, and so it's not all on you, right? Like we are clearly socialized from a young age, or however, right? That if we don't have a great parent like Nikki who's challenging that thought at 7, then we shouldn't be beating ourselves up at 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, right? Because we can reframe to a degree, but we've also been thinking that way for a while. And so it's great to sort of have these conversations with friends, with coworkers, with whomever is supportive to be able to help you reframe, but to know that it's not all on you, right? It's also how you've been brought up, the culture, etc.
And I thank you, Sharon. I think that's exactly right. And that really ties in specifically to some of the conversation that is happening in the chat, right? On perfectionism in the profession. And I'm like, maybe this ends up being our March conversation on honest decisions, because I don't, right? It needs its own hour plus. But this question of how do you divorce yourself from high standards and expectations of the law, like with the reality of being human and making human mistakes? And I think it is a constant struggle, but it is something that is worth struggling with, I guess is what I would say. And it is recognizing that we cannot necessarily change the structure as individuals. Like there are things we can do, but the structure, I don't want to say it is what it is in terms of like not resisting, but in this conversation, the structure is what it is. There is a lot of perfectionism and a lot of expectations around perfectionism in the profession. And that doesn't mean we don't start challenging our own thoughts and beliefs, whether they are truly our own or whether we are absorbing them from the profession, and what we do with that and choices we make within that space. And I'm going to let Sharon and Jesse speak to that probably a little bit more. But that is something actually that I think is an internal struggle that we kind of constantly have to have conversations around, and why we need other people. That is not a conversation we need to be having like internally alone, that we need to be having it in groups, in therapy, with friends, with mentors, in all sorts of spaces throughout the profession and society. There are a lot of societal spaces where this should be happening. Jessie, I see Jessie sitting forward, so I want her to
I will say this, I want to acknowledge it is exhausting to always having to have that feeling that you have to be perfect. You can't make human mistakes. That is very exhausting and frustrating. But it's kind of like, and then, as Nick is saying, is yes, we can't do this drastic wipe to change the structure, but also be able to say in your arena, in your environment, what can you do to implement those changes? And also recognizing that, yes, this is expected of me, but where do I have the control to not internalize it and not allow it to create these negative thoughts within myself? And yes, it's going to be a constant struggle. Is it a struggle you should have to do? No, but recognizing it is going to be a struggle.
And we wish it weren't. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
we always talk about in there, like amongst us, like we'd all love magic wands that we don't have, unfortunately. that is one that we would take away. But so acknowledging that perfection. Oh yes, please, Chris, I see a hand.
I just wanted, I don't mean to hog, but I
No,
want
go.
to add, I thought it would be easier for me to say this than in the chat. I totally relate to Alexandra's and Kristen's comments, and I'm aware also of the, especially from what I read in the DC Bar magazine, of lawyers' tendency toward depression and things like that because of the profession and the tendency towards perfectionism. But every once in a while I'll have friends who'll say, well, you think like that because you're a lawyer. Well, that may be true, but if I never went to law school, and you all, Nikki and Jesse and Sharon, were touching on this, it's also part of my inherent personality. So I just want to bring that out, that yeah, there's the profession point of it, and as you're saying, there's also the characteristics that I at least have for a tendency of perfectionism. In this conversation about, like you're talking about grace and how we talk to ourselves, the inner voices and the way we talk to ourselves is just so helpful to it's helping me to internalize it by hearing you say it instead of just like reading about it or someone telling me you have to do this technique or this cognitive behavioral or this reframing. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
I love what you just said too, Chris, because especially in our society, like very individualistic, right? And so coming together in community is really important, not just to feel less alone, but to have these conversations. We might be reading all the books and all the articles and listening to all the podcasts, but we're doing that by ourselves. So I appreciate what you just said.
So while we're working on our perfectionism and our self-compassion and all the things that we feel exhausted by, but are really important. What do I do when I still feel blurry? Like I'm working on those things, but I'm like struggling with gaining clarity. It still feels okay. I'm doing a little bit better in my self-compassion. I'm doing a little bit better on my perfectionism. But like I'm not sure what it is, but I need something different. And I'm feeling stuck in even moving forward. What do I do? How do I gain clarity?
I don't think you necessarily do. Right?
Tell me more.
I think that there's always something you can be doing, right? And sometimes that's just being still and not overdoing. But sometimes it just takes time, right? Like grief, like over time, we will process things and get to a different place. Maybe not a better place, but a different place, right? And I think a lot of times with clients, I want the answers right now, Sharon, like tell me what to do. Sure, if the therapist ever told you what to do, like this is the step, like wrong therapist, right? But like you need to be able to sort of to know yourself and know what your capacity is, right? But then also to recognize that maybe it's not the season that I'm going to gain full clarity. I know that's not really the answer anybody wanted to hear, but.
Gotcha. Thank you, Sharon.
It kind of makes me think of, and please, I hope I don't mess this up, the Martin Luther King quote of taking the first step. Do you have to see the whole staircase to take the first step? Do you have to know complete clarity what this change is going to look like? Do you have enough clarity to just take that first step for that change? And then with that first step taken, can that give me more clarity for the next step? Maybe, again, you may not get full clarity, but can you get partial clarity? Is that enough motivation? And does that give you enough hope to take that next step for that change you want to make?
Yeah.
I'm just putting to the chat room that Jennifer and Chris both said, right? Like stop thinking and start feeling. And I love that you both just said that. And that's really hard, right? It's really hard, especially for folks who are all up here, right? Attorneys, to drop into your feelings. Ugh, why would I want to go there? Right? Why do I ever want to go there? And so to have that ability to give yourself, that connection, you might start to feel things and it might not feel comfortable if you haven't done it in a while or ever,
But for those who do it here, I know for attorneys, you got to plan out cases. You got to have to know your outcomes. But even when you plan on cases, you're not going to know how that judge is going to respond. You're not going to know how the opposing attorney is going to respond. So you prepare for those, or you wait the outcome and you adapt.
Adapt.
The same thing can happen for us in our lives. I know if I take this step, I don't know all the outcome that I have. I can come up with what realistically, what I hope can happen, and what's the worst case scenario. And I can adapt to each one. So the same way you kind of plan out a case, like, okay, I'm gonna write the best brief, I'm gonna argue my best argument, but at the end of the day, there's gonna be part you don't control. And there's no different in our lives as well.
I think that's such an important reminder, and control is such a big thing too, right? In the stuckness. And there are like two pieces I would touch on. One is when you are feeling stuck, doing something in your control that is like tangible can be, and like productive in a way that is, we're not like, your own sense of productivity can be really important and actually shift you a little bit. So it could be physically walking. Like, I am feeling stuck. I cannot do this. It could be physically moving your body. It could be cleaning out a drawer. It could be baking some muffins, like calling a friend. So like doing anything where I have a choice is actually action, right? Like it puts you into an action mode because now I've made a decision. So when we feel stuck, actually doing something can make a really big difference. And sometimes we don't even know that's what we need, and then we do it, and then like it can start, there can be like a snowball effect. I actually had a client this morning I was talking to who's been feeling stuck for weeks. And she was like, I don't know what it was, but she lost her watch in her apartment. She's looking for her watch, and she ended up cleaning out her entire closet, had like bags of like, clothes to give away to Goodwill at the end of this. And then she goes, and then I just she just kept going. Like she's like, I felt lighter and I started making this decision and I made this decision. And I was like, yeah, that's what we're going to talk about later this afternoon. Like that's literally right what happened. But it's not like she even knew she needed it. She just kind of started doing it. She paid attention to where she was. She took an action, and then there was a snowball effect because of it. So do something small. If you're feeling stuck right now, make a decision, something very small, something in your control that will allow you to feel productive or powerful. And then one of the other things is kind of focus on what you are doing, right? Like what is in your control? What are you doing well? Like what is going okay? Sometimes one area of life ends up dominating when it's not feeling like it's going well, but we do have maybe other areas we're not tending to or focusing on particularly because of that negativity, skepticism bias of attorneys, where we focus on that thing and not the other things here. So sometimes looking at what I am doing, what is working can be really useful too. Yeah, the wisdom of the Serenity Prayer is quite powerful around control. Sharon and Jesse?
I think your last comment kind of rung to me, especially when you're not stuck in all areas of your life. Maybe there's one area where you feel stuck and other areas you feel like you're moving, you're growing. So maybe being able to say, what am I doing in that area that I could maybe translate into this other area where I feel stuck? Or what is it that I'm doing in this area that's keeping me stuck that I'm not doing in these other areas where I am growing?
And also accepting that I might feel stuck over here because that's just the situation. That's what it is right now.
Not my control.
Right? It's that and statement.
Yes. That's a great reminder, right? Like I've done the things actually in my control and I'm stuck. I've applied to jobs and nothing's working. I'm just stuck. I think that's a really good reminder. Thank you, Sharon. We also cognizant of time. So also want to encourage anybody that does have questions, comments. You all have been great in the chat and coming off, but if there are any, please feel free to, now is the time and space for that. Great question. So I'm going to read it out loud. I'm going to let Jesse and Sharon answer, but also I'm going to let anybody in the chat who has experience with this if they want to respond. How do you create a new circle of friends who can act as a sounding board and are not attorneys? Ladies.
I would say try new activities. the same way we say, do something different, maybe again, try different things, put yourself in different environments. And I will even say, even with your attorney groups, can we not talk about the law? Can we make that a rule? That we're not talking about work, we're not talking about our cases. Again, yeah, I agree. I think people should have friends in all circle of life, but if your circle of life we recognize is just attorneys, can we make a rule that when we're together, we're not talking about this? Yeah, school, community events, volunteering, religious event, community, volunteering for other organizations. If you like a particular sport, whether it's biking or running, have you join a running club or a bike club?
Book club.
Book club, yes.
And I like too what Jesse was saying about you can still have friends who are lawyers and not talk about your jobs, right? Because I know with a lot of clients, they'll say, I have no time to do anything outside of work and family, right? But can you not form, like Nikki was saying, a book club or something unrelated to your job with folks that you might meet at work, right? Make it a little easier for yourself as opposed to having to sign up for something else, something new that you just don't have the time for.
And it comes also back, I would say, to that, like I was talking with my 7-year-old, is you try something, and if that doesn't work, then you try the next thing. I think is important. So the one caveat I will say, I'm pretty sure the statistics are 1 in 9 people are attorneys in DC. So the odds are not great that you're gonna completely avoid attorneys. Speaking as somebody who ended up married to an attorney and whose best friend in DC is an attorney, it's just hard to get away. But
so
yes,
I'm not sure everyone is seeing the chat, but so we might want to just repeat the things in chat that just so that everyone on the call knows what we're looking at. That's all I'm saying. Yeah.
Okay.
The one about I just had to laugh out loud about the half marathon training. That is lawyers are everywhere in DC.
Right. So somebody tried to join a half marathon training to get away from the law, and the attorneys were there too. So we're just kind of laughing. They are everywhere. And then somebody else asked about having resources about how to find the right psychologist and one familiar with counseling lawyers. So what I would say, Denise, if you can put that information in the chat from earlier, the form, did you put it in there? The
WooFoo form, you mean?
The Woo-ish form, yeah.
The new one, yeah, sure, I can put it in there.
But so Denise will put some contact information in the chat. We're happy to help provide resources. We have a wealth of kind of connections to people in the area that are familiar with attorneys or familiar with whatever it is you kind of want to focus on, and we're happy to get you connected to those. Any other kind of questions, comments? There's the form. Denise put the form in. It's just kind of, you can put your email in and we'll follow up with you. We're happy to follow up with you. So while everybody thinks of any other questions, we'll send out a recording. We will send out resources. We will kind of focus on some of the things that we talked about, particularly kind of the self-compassion, ways to kind of questions to ask ourselves about getting unstuck, and anything else that you think is appropriate. We're all, good idea. So summarize the services of the Lawyer Assistance Program. Free and confidential. So kind of you would call, we can provide kind of assessment, short-term counseling, referral to resources. We have support groups. All our services are available virtually. We will also come into the office, just most people don't want to. But so you kind of have the option of either, but they're accessible. LAP@dcbar.org is kind of the easiest way to email us. Thank you, Sharon. Sharon just put our website online. And then Denise had put a form if you're interested in kind of any resources or support or additional information, that we were happy to get back to you. And we have volunteers. That is the other thing I should have said. We have wonderful volunteers who are attorneys themselves who kind of dealt with and struggled with issues, and they are happy to give back by kind of serving in a mentoring role in this space, like kind of in the mental health well-being space. And under bar rules, it's viewed as lawyer-client, so it's entirely confidential. And you don't actually need to kind of seek counseling with us to be connected to a volunteer. I think that is,
Did
I
you
think I
mention
hit all the
support groups?
questions because yes, virtual. So there are 2 virtual support groups. I did say it very briefly. I can go more. Tuesdays, there is a well-being support group kind of open to attorneys. And then Wednesday is a women identified group for law students and lawyers to kind of support each other. So there's a lot. They're both facilitated by Sharon or Jesse, but there's a lot of kind of peer support and conversation in those spaces.
And for anybody who is a law student, we have
Oh,
2
yeah.
bar prep support groups, one, a few weeks before the February bar, one a few weeks before the July bar. And that's also on our website.
Mm-hmm. I think, Denise, did we miss any questions or comments that we need to?
Sorry to unmute myself. I'm answering a couple to just there was one I wondered whether you got to it, but I think you might have already got to it. Yeah, so there's one more that I'm going to enter. It's I just wanted to address Michael, this like a conversation, reach out to us and let's have that discussion about our services, because it sounds like you have a specific question, so we're happy to talk to you about that offline.
But thank you everybody for participating. We
Yes.
really appreciate it. We will have another conversation. I think it's March 21st. I might be making that date up, but we'll send you the information. And we appreciate your time and kind of energy. So have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, everyone.
Guys.